Hi there, it's October the 14th, and we're continuing our voyage through Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians, reading today chapter 2 from verses 1 to 17, the whole chapter. There's some debate about 2nd Thessalonians, whether it's actually an authentic letter of Paul, mainly because there seems to be a discrepancy between what Paul is saying about the coming of Jesus in 1 Thessalonians and that here in 2 Thessalonians. But actually the discrepancy is really explained by Paul coming back and saying, look, you've misunderstood what I said. It looked in the first letter to Thessalonians, so Paul was saying Jesus is coming back imminently, but here he seems to put something else in that he didn't mention before. However, this to me is just a continuation. It's just an adjustment. It's not Paul. It's not different to Paul. This is all Pauline, and I would be with those who support the idea that 2 Thessalonians is an authentic letter of Paul. But here in chapter 2, Paul homes in on the fact that he says before the coming of Jesus, what he calls the gathering around, in Greek the episynagogy, the gathering around of the people of God. Before that happens, the gathering of people to Jesus, there are going to come certain historical things that are happening. Paul actually is speaking to the Thessalonians and warning them against being diverted or being misled by anyone claiming to be coming from Paul, whether they're coming in word or whether they're coming in writing. Whatever it is, Paul is saying he's concerned to hear that maybe there are those who are subverting his words to the Thessalonians, trying to make it appear that the day of the Lord has already happened, that there isn't anything else further to come. But Paul is saying, oh no, there is another stage to come. And this is where Paul unpacks the figure of the man of lawlessness, or anthropos anomias, the man of lawlessness. And he also connects it to what he calls the apostasia, what we might call apostasy, but actually means rebellion, the turning against God. Now, if we put Paul into his context here, and particularly if we put him into the Roman context, we know that round about the year AD 40, the Roman Emperor Caligula had really fallen out with the Jews, and he'd been against the Jews because he believed that the Jews were trying to undermine him. And in fact, the Herod of the time, Herod Antipas, had confessed that he had been plotting against Caligula, the emperor, and therefore Caligula determined that he was going to have an image of himself placed in every synagogue. When that was rejected and refused, and it caused riot, he actually wanted then a statue of himself to be put in the temple at Jerusalem. He decreed this twice. It didn't actually happen, but he did change the name of the temple in Jerusalem to the Temple of Jupiter, to reflect his own supposed divinity. And so Paul is perhaps realizing that there is a malevolence in the Roman Empire. There's a malevolence that could lead to something happening akin to what happened in the intertestamental years, in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, one of the successors of Alexander, who actually had an image put in the temple himself. Paul always sees this as being a threat. And so he's saying before Jesus returns, before the coming of Jesus, there is going to be an unveiling of lawlessness, an unveiling of rebellion against God, the like of which has not been seen before, and which he perhaps sees presaged in the action of Caligula back about maybe 10 years before he's writing this. And of course, it's significant that just coming up on the horizon is Nero and his terrible actions against the Christians. But obviously, Paul is also in line with thinking about the worsening of sin, that as sin increases, it gets worse and worse. And maybe it also ties in a little bit with John, in the revelation of John, the visionary of the apocalypse, who sees there being a figure coming that he calls Antichrist, the one who sits and rules against God. And therefore there is this concept here in 2 Thessalonians 2 that before the coming of Jesus there is going to be this worsening of evil. In fact, Paul calls it a strong deception sent from God, that there's not only going to be a turning away from God, but there's going to be an espousing of something that is anti-God. And then God is going to reveal from heaven his final analysis, his judgment, which will finally put the seal on evil forever. At the end of the chapter, Paul encourages then his readers, and he encourages them not to lose heart, but to stay strong in the faith, because they are the fruit of his work, and he also encourages them to continue in the traditions, in the things that have been handed on to them, to stand fast and not to be moved. And he prays for their building up in Jesus Messiah and in God, who loves them and has given them comfort forever. So despite these terrible things that are coming, this unleashing of lawlessness that Paul talks about, he is praying that they will be kept in strength and in the good works of the gospel that God's given them to do. We are still living in an age where there is this dichotomy, there is this paradox. There is this increase in the power of God. There is this increase in the move of the Holy Spirit. We've seen it more than anything over the last century or so, and that we're still continuing to see it today. But we also are seeing this inexorable increase in the power of what Paul calls anomia, lawlessness, moral incontinence. And it's amazing that the two can go side by side. The darkness is not able to overcome the light. Paul encourages earlier in his letter the Thessalonians to live as children of light. And as we see things darkening ever more, we can also stand as children of light, knowing that God will be revealed and that God will be vindicated in the end of the day. Have a very good October 14th.